So that being said, let's go to REST APIs. So can somebody tell me what is a REST API?
Well, it's just representational state transfer that we create on API. It's used to redirect requests
Okay.
and everything.
So one of the things I would suggest is that people use big terms when they don't understand something. Okay. Fancy terms, they think that they appear smart. I think that people who use fancy terms which they don't understand appear really like not very smart. So simple English, and when I say simple English, I would like to use words which would make sense to a 5-year-old, 7-year-old, or to your non-technical parents if you have non-technical parents. Okay, that's the best way. That's the language level I want you to use if you understand. And if you do not understand, use as sophisticated language as you want. You are just telling me that I don't understand what I'm talking about. I just want to appear smart, basically. Okay, so try to use words which make sense, easy to understand, representational connection. I don't know what any of that means basically, but if you can explain in English, anyone can explain in English what a REST API is. I'm here to listen. So does anybody understand what a REST API is?
It is the way to communicating with the two applications with an HTTP request.
Sure. So some technical terms, but simpler than what Ishan said. Anybody else?
It is kind of a messenger that takes our request to the server and brings back the information that we asked for.
Yeah. So the other thing I would say is that do not restate everybody else's statement. Communication between two applications sent to the server. But yeah, you added the word server and client, kind of important. So anyway, so REST API, all of it is correct. Basically, Ishan's full form is also correct, and what it is. But simple terms, it is a way of communication. So if I look at REST API, it's a way of one of the ways of communication between applications or between applications using a particular protocol, which is HTTP, which itself sits on TCP. TCP. What is a TCP? TCP is Transmission Control Protocol. HTTP is Hypertext Transmission Protocol. It's used on the web between browsers. Now, what is a protocol? It's a language. We are talking in English. That's a protocol. English grammar is a protocol. When we talk in French, French grammar is a protocol. Same way computers have a language of communication. That's a protocol. TCP is the standard protocol which is underlying most communication between applications. There are different forms of TCP protocol. For example, you have HTTP is a TCP protocol. You could do binary transmission over TCP. You could do web sockets over TCP. You could do a lot of stuff over TCP. Those are all TCP protocols. REST API is based on the HTTP protocol, where they have a grammar defined and you communicate about it. Like Rishika said, there are three things in there. There is a REST client. The client is the one who wants information or sends information. There's a REST server, which is actually processes the information. And then there is a REST verb, which says what is being done, kind of thing. And we'll look at all of this thing. The key thing to remember about a REST API is it is stateless, which means that when you make a request, that request does not remember what happened in the previous request, kind of thing. It's like a web page. When you go to CNN.com, you're going to CNN.com. CNN.com does not know that you were there before. Yeah, in theory, they do know because they are dropping additional things like cookies and other things which maintain state. But the request itself does not know that you are the same person. It is a stateless architecture. The key benefits of REST API and it's a design pattern is that it allows separation of the different layers. Like, for example, I did say REST client and REST server. Does not mean one REST server. For example, it could be a layer where there is a client A, which is communicating with the server API B, which is communicating to a server API C, which is communicating to a server API D, and then there's a database behind it, E, right? So each of these layers, if you're at layer 2, then the API 1 is the client and the next API is the server, right? So depending upon which layer you are in, the layer which is requesting is the client, the layer which is processing is the server, and so on, kind of thing, right? So API can become a client and API can become a server, right? Depends on which scenario it is in. If an API calls another API, it's a client. Whereas if an API processes the request from someone, it is a server, right? So client and server are very generic terms which can change definition. If you have two API servers, they can be client or server. Just because it's a hosted on a server doesn't make it a server kind of thing. Okay, so it allows you to organize your code better and organize your architecture better, organize responsibilities better, where you have APIs which do specific things, right? So what are the 6 constraints of a REST API according to Roy Fielding? So they are stateless, there's a client server, there's a uniform interface, which means that all APIs look very similar kind of thing, right? Like they do not follow any random words kind of thing. So there is a pattern. There's always a pattern to the API format. If you know the format, you can pretty much guess what it is. For example, if the API to get product ID 1 is /product/1, then the API for getting the second product will be /product/2 and /product/3, right? So there is a pattern to it. API responses can be cached, which will they declare how it will be cached. They are layered, which means that client really cannot tell where the data is coming from. Client just knows that it is connecting to one API, but that API may be connecting to 1,000 other APIs behind the scenes. The client doesn't know where it is coming from kind of thing. It just knows that it is getting some data from somewhere kind of thing. I will, this code on demand, I'll leave it alone. I don't think I understand it myself, so I'm not going to talk about what that means basically. Uh, REST API verbs. So these are the main verbs that we use. Verbs tell what the API is going to do. The get is the easiest one. It gets something. So when you use the get verb with an API, it is getting something. When you are putting something on the server, saving something on the server, you will use a post verb. And if you're updating someone, you have a choice. You can use a put when you replace the entire object, and patch when you do a partial object. Like for example, if you create a user, getting a user, you will use the get verb. If you want to create a new user, you can use the post verb. If you want to update the whole user object, you can use the put verb. But if you just want to update the first name of the user, you will use a patch verb. Delete is for deleting the user, deleting the object, again semantically, and I'll talk about that. And options is used by some calls to do before the call to figure out metadata, like for example course, like okay, this API is allowed to access this API and all of that stuff. Now these are conventions, right? Which means that in theory, no system enforces what these APIs actually does. It is very much possible to write a get API, which will actually write data. It is possible to write a post API, which will get data. It is like you can do all sorts of random things, right? So what this means is that it's REST verbs are conventions. A good engineer follows conventions. However, you can do anything you want in any of them except for the options. You can pretty much do anything you want in any one of them, and there is no enforcement by any system out there other than human conventions in particular organization. So when you are writing API, think about why you're writing it. I would like you to use the verb in the right context. It shows that you understand what it has been used for, even though there is no enforcement from any compiler or anything around that. As far as delete verb goes, in our organization, we never delete anything. We always do a soft delete of everything, right? So in theory, that could be a patch, but you will use a delete curve because we are semantically indicating that we are deleting it, even though in the database, we are just setting a flag that this is deleted equal to true or active equal to false or whatever it is. We are never physically deleting it. In fact, when you're writing APIs, make sure that your design never says that you're physically deleting something. You are marking something for deleting. This is something that you have to remember as a convention. I am going to, if you propose a design and you're saying that you're deleting something physically, I will not be very happy. I'll be happy if you tell me that you're marking something for deletion. There's a status flag which will change basically based on that, right? So that's kind of important. Patch is the preferred call for updates. We use patch most often because we are not normally updating the full object, so partial objects. So patch is what we use. Get is very simple. Post is very simple, not very complicated. Again, as I said, you can do anything in any one of them. The difference between an engineer and non-engineer is that they know what is the right verb to use because it conveys the proper meaning across kind of thing. So the best way to look at REST API is a contract. Like all of you guys are working in different companies, E-Team, Humanize IQ, you have an employment contract which says, okay, this is what your responsibility, this is what our responsibility, all of that stuff is there, right? A REST API is like that. REST API is a contract. It says that, okay, this is what I'm going to provide and this is what I'm going to get, right? So it has input parameters. It has output specifications which says that, okay, the result will be sent in JSON format or an XML format, or these are the kind of error codes which are going to be there, or these are going to be the success codes which are there. So format is important, response code is important, error code is important. In today's world, almost 100% of APIs are JSON format. So format is not a discussion. When I started working, it was XML was the prominent standard, and XML became JSON. There are systems which support both kind of thing, but in today's world, JSON is the format, and we will stick with JSON for most of our APIs. Response codes, you need to understand what HTTP response codes are. When you're developing your application, typical success response code is 200 or 201, and if something doesn't exist, 404, which means that not found, 500, which means that there's an error, and so on. So there are standard HTTP error codes and standard HTTP response code. I would study that you should be familiar with the following: the 200 range, the 301, 302 range, the 400 range, which includes 404, 403, 401, and the 500 range, basically. These are error codes which you will use almost every day. And someone who says that, okay, so many times when you're working, you will receive a 401 error code on your API. Can somebody tell me what a 401 error code on your API means? Anyone? Yes, Ishan.
Authentication error.
Correct. 401 401 code is authentication. So if authentication failures has happened, it should give a 401 error code, which tells you that you need to investigate how the authentication is working. So they're very industry standard. It is not our standard. So it is important to use the right code in there. What is the 500 error code? Yes, Rishika.
Internal server.
Yeah, a 500 error code means that some error happened on the server. Sometimes those errors are known errors, sometimes they're unknown errors. So whatever the error may be, return the error code and return error message saying what the error is if you're handling it. Handled error versus unhandled error. Handled error, typically you mean that you have an exception block in your code. Unhandled error means that you have a finally block in your code to catch everything, or a catch all, or a catch generic exception where you're catching all the expression error in there. So please make sure. In our company, an authentication is different in every organization. In our company, we will be using two mechanisms of authentication. Every API that you create, you need to make sure that it is authenticated. Why? In today's world, APIs get hacked, and we do not want to get hacked. When we get hacked, if they get into our AI systems, it can cause huge cost, basically. So none of you should develop any APIs which is not authenticated. Our templates already have authentication in there. But even if you start from scratch, these are the two authentication mechanisms you need to support in our system. One is called X API key, and one is called Studio API key, right? I think no, Studio cookie. I am mistaken. I have to correct it. It should be X-Studio-cookie. Now, X API key is a key which is created in a backend system. So we have a database where we can create an API key. It is to be used between application to application. So for example, when one system communicates with another system, we will use X API key because there is no user involved. We will create a key for the system, and we will use that. However, whenever the user is working with the system, we will use the X Studio cookie or the auth cookie. All of our APIs also support the auth cookie. So either you will pass a HTTP header called X Studio cookie, where you can pass in the HTTP auth cookie, or a base 64 version of the auth cookie. And we'll talk about why base 64 version. We will pass those cookies, and that will be authenticated for that user. Or by default, when you log into our site, there is an auth cookie dropped in your browser that will be used for automatically authenticating our APIs. So our APIs support 3 authentication modes by default. I'll correct this slide. First is X API key, which is created for each application and sent in the request. Then X Studio cookie, which is you pick up the cookie from your browser code and put it in there. The third is an auth cookie, which is automatically handled by API. So make sure that when you're testing your API, you test it all the 3 ways that it works. As I said, the API should have a URL structure which has a base URL. The base URL in our case always should be www.playtest.humanizeiq.ai/API/something. So for example, if I'm doing an API for configuration, it will be www.playtest.humanizeIQ.ai/API/config_manager. If it is non-prod, it will be www.dev.humanizeIQ.ai/API/config manager, and so on, kind of thing, right? If it is eteam, then it will be www.myeteam.playtest.myeteam.ai/api/something. So key thing is that the relative portion is always going to have /API, then the name of your application, right? And the base URL will be fixed for the environment that you are in, right? Key thing, and we have not gone over this, we manage all of this as configuration. So when you're writing your code, make sure no URL is hard coded. That means that you should always have configuration for your base URL, so that it will work in every environment. If you hard code playtest, that means that it will not work in not work in production. So make sure that all of those are configurations. We have places to manage configurations, and we'll go over that. But do remember that everything that we do should be configurable. Okay. REST API documentation. So there are multiple ways to document REST APIs. The first one is Markdown. That means that you can manually document something in a Markdown format, and I will show you an example of that. And you can say that, okay, this is the API, the verb is this, the URL is this is the input parameter, this is the output parameter, these are the HTTP codes, these are the error codes, this is the format. You will document all of this manually, and there's nothing wrong with it, and you can get a design review done. In case of complex APIs, it is good to do it that way. However, you also have the ability to create automatic documentation by using Swagger and OpenAI. What that means is that you can actually create the stub for your application. Remember, after your high-level design, you have already created your project stub. That means that you can go to your project stub and say that, okay, create the API with this input and this output. It will actually create the empty mock API, and you can deploy it, and that Swagger page can serve as the documentation. The advantage of that is that it will also create an open API.json documentation, which is used by AI to process AI. So this is going to be, so open API.json is what AI is going to use in our environment to work with API. For the human readable form, we will use Markdown and Swagger, right? All three are used kind of thing. And you need to have open API.json after the API is done, definitely. But Swagger and Markdown is your choice when you're starting out. Okay. There are two kind of API frameworks that we will use in our organization. One is the Cloudflare Worker, which is what we're going to do the practice today. And there we will be using Node with Hono as the framework. Using Hono means that we get the Swagger documentation automatically out of the box. You don't have to manually create it. The other one is Python Fast API framework, which when you use also creates Swagger and Open API documentation automatically out of the box. So you don't really have to do much for the documentation other than use this framework. They built it out of the box kind of thing. Both are used when we want to deploy a container in a container environment. We will use Python Fast API, but in 99% of the cases, we'll try to use Cloudflare Worker. We should not use Python Fast API unless something has to be done on a server we own. We want to take the serverless approach for doing things kind of thing. Okay. This is very important. So when you're developing an API, it is very important for you to test. I need you to learn to test all the three ways. So each of you should know these three ways very well. The Swagger is easy because you go to the Swagger page, you enter the values and it executes. There's nothing to learn in there. The Postman is the tool. If you have not installed Postman on your computer, do install Postman on your computer. Although you can use it on the web, it allows you to save your request so that in future also you can test. And the curl command line is a command line way of testing. I would make sure that you know how to execute curl command on the command line and execute it, because sometimes one tool is not working and you want to debug it. These three tools will help you. So do not learn one or the other. All these three tools will be needed. So please practice these three tools. Don't use AI to do it till you know it. Learn. Once you know that you can do it without AI's help, then you can use AI in the future for everything. But these are important things. Most people who waste time and do not get things done slowly are because they don't know how to use these tools. If you do not use these tools, three things will happen. You will keep pushing code, you'll deploy, you will fail, you'll come back, and you'll keep going back and forth. Use these tools, you'll get it done in one go, what the problem is, and you'll test locally and deploy kind of thing. Okay. So working with AI. So first of all, as I said, you can write the spec. So when you did your front-end applications, a lot of you did front-end applications in your last class. You were all given exercises, both in Anuba's class and I gave you. Now, if you did it properly, it would have generated mocks of the data that it needed, right? Now you can actually ask the AI to tell you that, okay, I want to do this using API, generate the mock API spec for this thing. It will actually give you an API spec in Markdown format, which you can then give the AI for AI, and it can develop according to it, right? That's the best way, I would say, for developing APIs, that when you're developing a front end, you ask the API to tell you the API specification of what API is needed. If you're doing a brand new API, that's the best way. That means that the AI which is developing the front end is telling you what API is needed. If you develop an API which meets that, integration is going to take 5 minutes. Basically, it will save you a lot of time, right? So that's a strategy you use, kind of thing. If you are existing API, then you can actually provide the reference to the front end, and it will connect to it. So step will be that, okay, you have a front end, you ask it to give it a spec, you take the spec, you develop the API, the API is deployed, it will give you an open API.json, you give it to the front end and tell the front end that, okay, this is the open API.json, now integrate with this API. It will replace the mock with the real, and in 5 minutes it will all be working. Okay, if you do this very systematically, pretty much each step will be very, very, very simple for you to work. If you don't follow any of the steps, it will become confusing. So step is very simple. You do front end, brand new, this is for a brand new application. You do front end development, you ask it to develop the application using mock APIs. You use the word mock APIs. You ask your AI to document the mock APIs in a markdown format in an API spec.md file, right? So, and then you test locally. If you get your front end application approved, then you take the API spec.md file and take it to your AI project and tell the AI that, okay, this is the API spec, I want you to develop the API. It develops the API, you test the API locally, you deploy the API. Once it is deployed, you take the open API.json file from the API and give it back to the front-end project and say that, okay, the API is developed, this is the API specification, now integrate. And it will replace the mock with the integration. At that time, if you commit the code, it will work end-to-end, right? That's how simple it is. You skip any one of the steps, you are going to spend more than a day to fix it. Basically, you don't skip any of the step, in an hour you will have front and back end all deployed working together. That's kind of the difference with it, right? So the key thing what I was saying is that spec generation, AI can generate spec referencing, open API.json. The specification which is generated, you can give it to the next layer and it will develop the API for you. Okay, so two modes. We will be developing APIs, which means that maybe you start with an API, in which case you have to write the markdown, or you can tell AI to write the Swagger, whichever way works for you. Most common starting point is integrating. So like, for example, in your current application, you may need to integrate with existing APIs, in which case you will have to provide an open API.json file, and that will integrate with an existing file. In our exercises today, I will show you how to develop an API. But when you start working, I want you to start with first integrating existing APIs before you develop your own. You need to learn the integration. If you know integration well, development is easy, and it actually takes longer to do integration than to do development. Development is always starting from scratch, is always easy. Integration is always hard because you're integrating with something else, two different things connecting together, always hard. So focus on integrating, and when you need to develop, then develop, kind of thing. Okay, I talked about base 64 encoding. Now, this is going to be important in a lot of things. When we are transferring data, sometimes we have text, sometimes we have images, sometimes we have spaces, sometimes we have special characters. When you transfer that over HTTP protocol, some of these characters that get processed incorrectly. So it's always good to use something like a base 64 encoded format for transferring data. And on the other side, it will be base 64 decoded. For us human beings to look at it, we have a website called base 64 encoded, where you can give any text and it will base 64 encoded, and then it can decode it, kind of thing. You will need to use base 64 encoding a lot. Basically, that's why I put it out there, so that everybody has these links in place so that you're going to use it. So for today's classroom exercise, what are we going to do? We are going to create a new repo from a template. We're going to clone that repo. We're going to create a feature branch so that we can build and deploy that repo and make sure that the API is working. Then we will create a feature branch for a new endpoint. We will code the endpoint. We will test it locally, and then we'll commit, build, and deploy. And that's the whole cycle. Okay, that's going to be what we're going to do now. Any questions before we start, kind of thing? I went fast, so I'm going to go to the practical part. But before I do, I can answer any questions on any of the slides that you have.
Raj, can you explain that Swagger on AI development once again, because it's
Yeah.
little
So I will show
complicated.
you. So let's, so before we start developing, so this is a good thing. So let me show you how the APIs look. So I will show you one of the APIs which we use very commonly in our organization, which is dashboard backend. It's called. This is a Python API, right? This is what a Swagger documentation page looks like. A Swagger documentation page is automatically created, which allows you to test your API through this thing. Like for example, I can say try it out, and this is what a Swagger documentation looks like, kind of thing, right? It is a industry standard. It is generated automatically, kind of thing. It allows you to set up the authorization parameters and then execute the API right out there, right? So since you can execute right out there, and the interesting thing is that it gives you the curl command to execute. So you can try the curl command on your computer and know that how the API works, basically, right? So very important to know what the curl command is. It teaches you and see what the response is, which is what it is. So it helps you evaluate the API. Always before using an API, check out its Swagger page, learn how to. So many of you, when I give you an exercise, what you will do is you will straight away go to your front end application and try to connect to an API. Okay, don't do that. That's the worst way of doing it. Whenever you get an API, the first thing to do is try to use the API directly. If you know how to use the API directly, then your front end tries to connect to it and the front end is getting into trouble, you will be able to solve it. If you directly try to work with the front end, you will not understand the API. And when you understand an API, it's about, okay, what are the input parameters? What are the output parameters? All of those things are important. Once you understand it and once you can manually code an API, your front end will also be able to connect to an API. The Swagger page allows you to do that interactively, right? Same thing you can do with the Postman. So for example, let's do this, right? So this API which I showed you, so let's go to this health endpoint, which is always there. So normally every endpoint, every API we have as an health endpoint, which is not authenticated, because that is used to just check the status of an API. So I want to test this API using curl. So I can copy this curl command and I can say here curl, and it is going to give me the same response, healthy, which is what I got here also, right? So I got the same response here, and I can test it using Postman. So if I in Postman, so Postman allows you to save your request so that next time you come in, you don't need to create it. So I can create a collection. So let me create a new collection, blank collection. This is learning, right? So you can save your request so that next time. So let's test the API, and then in this learning, I want to create a request. So our request is, let's see what the request is. So this actually has a benefit of, actually there is, I think you can create it. I can say import. Actually, let me do this. Let me delete this. Uh, delete. Okay, so add request. I think it was the import. Add request. Add example. Delete. About where there was an import. There was a import. Hold on. Where was the import? Okay, I don't see the import. I'll do it manually. So for doing it manually, I will go to the same page, which is this Swagger page. The URL to use, this is the request URL. So I need a request URL. So request URL is here. The verb is get. So all the verbs are there. So if you look at it, my verb is get, and that's and then it has is accept application JSON, which is also set up by default. That will be automatically there in Postman. So if I go to headers, it will have the, do I not have it? Okay, let's put accept instead of this. This should be, why is it not letting me? Okay, I don't need to do that. Okay, so if I do this now, I've tested it using this. I have tested it using Swagger, and I have tested it using command line, right? So it tells me, now this was a simple API. Let's take something more complicated. Let's say your authentication cookie. So remember we talked about your authentication cookie. So if I go to playtest.humanizeIQ.ai, where is your authentication cookie? So this is another tool you all need to run, which is the browser debugging, right? So in your browser, you have to get familiar with how to debug application using network calls. So this will tell you all the calls which happens. The other thing, you need to know how to look at your cookies. So if I go to application, you will see that you have cookies there. And if I look at it, the cookies are interested in this auth cookie, auth playtest cookie. This is my cookie. If you understand it, this cookie doesn't mean anything. This identifies you, this identifies me, but you don't understand it. You want to understand what this cookie means, you need to decrypt it. So how do you decrypt it? There is an API here for decryption. So let's look for an API for decryption. So decrypt cookie. So there is a decrypt cookie API. So let's try it out. I need to paste that string in here. So I pasted this, and now this API will not work. It will give me an error. It says, oh, it actually worked because, oh, it worked because, why? Can somebody tell me why it worked? I gave this answer when I was doing the presentation. Can somebody tell me why it worked? It should not have worked basically when I did this, but it worked. Why did it work? Why did it give the results? Let's see who was listening. What are the 3 authentication mechanisms we support on our APIs?
XAPI, it's Studio Cookie and Auth Cookie.
Okay, so X API key, Studio Cookie, and Auth Cookie. Now, since I am in this browser and I'm logged onto the site, the Auth Cookie is present. That's why I work. So if I actually do an incognito session, right? So let me try the same URL in an incognito session. Like I will take this and go to the incognito session and try this again, right? And let's go to decrypt. So the health endpoint will work. Let's look at health. So health should always work, right? Health should still work. Health is supposed to be not protected, but let's look at decrypt. So let's try this and try this out. And I have to place, so in this case, it says this is the input format. I need the cookie. I will take the cookie from here and put it into this one. And I will paste it here, right? And now if I execute it, it should not work. It says it is invalid. Basically, it did not work basically. Okay. So in this case, it gave a 403 error and it says valid API key is required. So I need to provide an API key, which I can provide. In this case, this API only accepts X API key. This was developed long time back when we did not do this. So it supports X API key and the actual auth cookie. Now the X API key for this is, I have to find out what the X API key for this one is, because it's been a long time since I did this. Cancel file, open folder, and if I look at AI dev, and if I look at dev, and let's look at Explorer. Spaces, workers. Not there. Okay. There, it is R2, R2 Explorer. Okay. Open. Let me see if I can find. Okay, this is the key. Okay, so if I use this key, authorize, and let's try this, and let's now execute it again. Not the health endpoint, but this endpoint execute. Now it decrypts the cookie properly, right? So our APIs are encrypted and it only works with 3 mechanisms. Either I have to provide an X API key or I have to provide an auth cookie, and many of our APIs will work with X Studio cookies. Studio cookies needed for some scenarios, so we use that, right? So we never dropped, from a security perspective, we never dropped anything about the user on their local environment because somebody can steal that information. So it's always encrypted and every request will decrypt it and provide that information. For example, it tells me that, okay, this is my ID, this is my username, this is my company or whatever it is, this is my role and all of that stuff kind of thing, right? So this is Swagger documentation, and the same thing, like just like I did it here, I can do the same request in Postman. So let's do curl first. So if I look at it, there is a curl command. So I can actually copy the curl command I am copying it because I can construct this request manually. I would suggest that if you have never done curl command, try to construct this URL step by step in your hand. Curl, Postman, and Swagger are three essential skills for developers. So sometimes the tools doesn't work, AI doesn't work, you will be stuck basically, but it is better. So I will do this and it should still give me the same result, basically cookies decrypted successfully. And I can do the same thing in Postman. So in Postman, I can say, okay, create another request, right? This time, okay, and you should name your request. So this request was renamed, this is health. And now we are going to rename it to decrypt auth cookie, right? So same thing, the first thing we need is the verb. So let's look at what the verb is. If I look at it, the verb in this case is post. So we will use post. The next thing we need is the URL. So this is the URL. So this is the URL. Then you need HTTP headers X API key. So you need to have X API key. So you go to headers, you need to have X API key, and you need to put the value in there. You need to put the value in there. And in this case, we had to put a body also in there. So this was the request. Any request other than the get request will always have a body. Get is the only verb which does not have body. It only has URL. An option also doesn't have body. So get and options don't have body. Every other request typically has a body in there, and that's kind of what it is used. So in this case, you'll go to body. You can call it a raw. You can paste the body here. And then if I execute it, I will be able to see the same response here. So if you look at it, I can test the API using Postman on my computer. I can test the API using curl. I can test the API using this thing. What does this testing tells me? This testing tells me that when my front end is calling it, it needs to call this URL. It needs to use the post method. It needs to use this body, and it will get this response, and it has to use this headers, right? Think about it. If I gave you these 5 pieces of information, do you think that you can write a code to use that API? Yes, you can probably tell Python, okay, make this HTTP call with this headers, right? Which means that AI can also make the call. So the goal of learning to use this tool is to figure out how to tell AI what to do. Yes, AI can figure it out, but you have to go with the assumption that sometimes the AI will not be able to figure it out. It will get stuck because there is some confusion because the API is not documented correctly. But if you know how to use the API, you will be able to help AI to figure it out. In most cases, you give AI the Swag documentation. How do you give API the Swagger documentation? Not the Swagger, the Open API documentation. So for every API that we have, you see the link is here. And if you actually go to this URL and instead, if you say docs, you get to the Swagger documentation. But if you go to openapi.json, you will get the openapi.json documentation. Why? Oh, sorry, spelling mistake. Openapi.json, you will get the JSON. Now you cannot read it, but an AI can read this and understand this. So if you provide API access to this URL, or you save the file locally in the project and say that this is the API documentation, your code can integrate with this API. So in your exercises that you did basically, which in Anubha's class or in my Explorer exercise I gave you, right? Explorer exercise was that you need to provide an interface to manage your digital files and all of that stuff, right? That was the exercise, right? So we have an API called Explorer. So if I go to this API to Explorer docs, and I'm not going to tell you how, while I will show you the API development, but I'm not going to show you this. I want you to try this on your own. You will go to this URL and you will get the openapi.json, right? This API you can give to your AI to integrate this into the real system, right? But before you do that, you need to figure out which APIs to use. So I want you to explore this API, figure out how these APIs work, try it out in curl, try it out in Postman, and try it out in Swagger. And then you figure out, I want you to document that, okay, this is what I will do. My API will use this API to get files, this API to upload files, this API to update files, right? And then you ask your front end to integrate with this API using that documentation, right? This is an exercise for you to take and figure out. And if you get it done, let me know. I believe that only one person Ankit had pinged me his URL for his demo. Nobody else pinged me anything basically. So I don't know if anybody else did their exercise or not. Basically, that's the only exercise I got. But if you didn't, please do it. The more you practice, the better you get it. Basically, like the speed at which I'm going is going to make sense to you only if you are doing this frequently enough and you have a good grasp of repeating this and doing this kind of thing, right? So please make sure you evaluate this API, try this API, note down the URL of this API. This is the Explorer API. This API is used in our organization for whenever the files are uploaded. It is also used for RAG basically. So this has the RAG knowledge base APIs, which means that if you want to add something to the knowledge base, this is the API which is used in secure chat when you're adding files to the knowledge base. This is the API. All files are managed through this API. And if you're doing anything file based, you're expected to use this API. This API stores file in Cloudflare. So did you guys get introduction to Cloudflare yet from Kesan? You got introduction to Cloudflare? Yes, no? Right? So in Cloudflare, did he tell you about R2 buckets? Yes, no?
Yes, Raj.
Okay. So an R2 bucket, R2 is an object store. It is similar to S3 buckets in Amazon or Azure, Google. Google also has something like that, and Azure also has something like that. It's an object store. So we have R2, if I look at it, so we will have, so all of the files that we upload through those APIs end up in R2 Explorer playtest, for example. So if you look at it, every user, every company, the files will end up in there, and inside there will be users, and there will be user folders, and there will be user files. All of those things are kind of out there in there, right? So they're organized in some, and they come because of that API kind of thing, right? So as you're testing it, you need to make sure that files don't get created in random places. They get created in some places. We will go over R2 Explorer API in detail at some time. Right now, I would suggest that explore the API, try to use it, try to connect it to your weekend exercise and see if you can connect it. If you get it done, please show. I don't expect that you will be able to, but if you get it done, please definitely show it, and I would like to see it basically. So Tasneem, did I answer your question on Swagger, OpenAPI, Postman, Skull, and all of those things? I showed all of those things. Any questions on any of that stuff? I covered a lot of information very quickly. So any questions I can take quickly. Okay, so next we will do is create an API, learn how to create an API. So for that, what we'll do is we'll go to git.code. You will search for CF, and this will give you a CF worker API template. So this is the template. So I will say use this template, and I will select humanize IQ or E-team if it is E-team. And I will say repository name is my test underscore API, right? And by the way, right now there's a defect, but in general, when you create a component in Craft Studio, it automatically creates the repo from this template. I'm showing you the manual way of doing it. You should always know the manual way of doing it, because right now there's a defect. System is not working. Rather than waiting for somebody else to do it, if you know how to do it, it will work. So even when you click a new component, and if you click an API in there, it does the same thing. It will take this template, it will create that repo for you, and it will set up the data. It will set up those things here basically. So I'm doing the same thing. So it created a repo. I'm doing it manually because right now the system is not working. Then I will go to the other thing, guys. I don't know. I've seen people like to save files on their desktop, on Windows or whatever. As a developer, getting organized on files on your file system, when you show your computer, when you show how your files are organized, it shows how much of a engineer you are and how much of an amateur you are, right? An amateur dev engineer will put files on their desktop, will have files in my documents, will have files in all sort of places. An engineer will never have a file in those places. Like for example, in my case, this is my home directory, right? Which is great, which everybody has. And then I have a folder called workspace, right? So workspace is where I work. In my workspace, I have folders for different purposes. Like for example, I have my front-end application in worker apps, my back-end APIs in workers, my evaluations, third party. So there are folders for everything. So in this case, I'm going to work in a worker. So I'm going to go to workers, and I will say git clone, and I will give it the URL. It will clone this. Then the next thing I'm going to go is that this is a new repo, and let me see if the repo has the dev container. So what was it? So ls hyphen la. Does it have, it has the dev container file. So the template has the dev container file, so I don't have to do the manual steps. So I can directly go to dev pod. I can say create, I will say folder, I will browse to it, I will select this folder, I will open, and everything else is set. I will say create my workspace, and pretty much the work is wait for it to come up. I'm trying to tell you how to do things in 15 minutes, guys. Like I'm going to do this in less than 15 minutes kind of thing, and that's kind of the goal, right? So I do this, I go to terminal, right? And this is my playtest environment. So I will say git checkout. And again, you can do this using AI. If you practice by hand, you will be faster. AI will be slower. Git checkout -b feature -build -deploy, and always knowing by hand and then using AI is better. It created the branch and deployed it. I will always do a git pull to make sure there is nothing there. In this case, I'm not trying to make any changes. So I am just going to, for now, commit the code. So I'm going to go to commit the code. Hold on, kilo code. Let me go to this thing. I'm going to go to initial. Let me, since I'm not doing anything, initial build and deploy. Right. So let's see, publish branch, and it's done. So I want to see the magic. So let me go here. If it things happen, there is no workflow. So something did not go right. So let's go in here. Did not go right. Did the code come? Let's see, did the code come? The code is there. Okay. It did, the branch is created, but some things are not created. So once this is created, a couple of things you need to do. You select your playtest, and you select playtest, and then you create a branch called dev, right? And it'll ask you create branch dev from playtest. You do need it. And make sure that you again select dev and then say main, and it will create a branch. Make sure this setup is there so that you have 3 branches. But if you look at it, my feature branch is there. It did not automatically merge it, basically. That's because there is something missing in my PR. This auto PR is there. Git T workflows. And what is this file? Oh, this is wrong. So this file should not be workflow. So the mistake here is that my file should be called, so the folder, there should be folder called workflow. So new folder, workflows. Okay, I have to rename this, rename. This should be auto underscore pr.yml. And I should have a folder called, so if you want DevOps CI/CD to work, there should be a folder called workflows under .git. This auto pr file should be here, move, and then I should commit, updated auto pr, sorry, wrong place. Initial build and updated auto pr. Let's commit, sync, and this time hopefully magic should happen. And again, a lot of these things happen manually, guys. The reason I'm showing it is that if you know how things work manually, when system fails, you will be one of those people who will be saying that, okay, I got it done even when the system fails. Or you'll say, okay, today's system was down, I could not get anything done, or you're waiting for someone. So it's always good to know how things work and then use tools like AI to get things more efficiency around it. Never use AI for things that you do not know how to work, basically, right? So it's always very important. So the PR failed, because this probably is the old this thing. So let me get the latest. So rather than try to figure it out, and because I'm not teaching this class right now, I'm going to take the PR from the file from somewhere else. So let me look at what is it I need? SSO. I did it on SSO last night. So let me take the file from there, copy this thing. So these are ready-made files, so you really are not writing it anyway. So I don't need to debug it. I'll fix it. Updated auto PR commit sync changes. Okay, so let's try this one more time. It should have done. I always like to see if the action is happening. It is happening. It's good. Okay, creating PR. It created a PR. It did this, right? So by default, it created a PR from build deploy to playtest, and it actually will act. So let's see. So by default, this PR gets created and it should automatically get merged also if our repo is set up with the webhook. So let's see, repo is set up with the webhook, but it is red, which means that it failed basically. It failed because, did somebody tell you what should be coming here? They told you about this one. You need to put the authorization in there. So update the webhook. And once I update the webhook, I can try to re-execute. So let's try to this again. And let's just say, so it got unauthorized failure, 401. 401 means that authentication was incorrect. Replay this webhook. And this time, let's see if it succeeds. And if it succeeds, we will see, we will go to git dot code. The magic will happen in another repo, which is the not pipeline. So look at, oh, there is something happening. Let's see if it is my project or not. It is it my project? Yeah, it is my test. So it is actually doing the, so if you look at it, it triggered the webhook. It is actually doing the build in my environment. It's going to deploy to Cloudflare. And so if I look at now Cloudflare, if I go to compute, I will see that a worker is deployed, C template. So, okay, so it deployed it a C template playtest. My mistake, right? That means the build is not correct, right? Which means that again, I have to go back and there's a file called wrangler.toml. There is something called CF template hard coded in every places because this is coming from a template. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a universal replace of CF template with my test, my underscore test underscore API, right? So I will replace that, this thing, and I will also replace CF underscore template with the same thing, right? And now I will make another commit. So that one, let me commit again. So generic, so let me generate it comment. And you're supposed to put Craft Studio from your components in there. Please do that. It is important. Okay, so I will commit. I'll sync changes. So this will not work. I have to do it from here. Git push. Can you tell me why that command failed? Why is the sync failing from here? Any guesses? Okay. When I did this auto PR, it actually deleted the feature branch. So if I go back in here, the feature branch is, if I go to the code, I will see that the feature branch does not exist. When the PR got merged, the feature branch automatically got deleted. So now in my repo, I'm working on the same feature branch and trying to push to it. So when I say sync, it does not work. It says that the branch could not be found. However, that is just a VS Code issue. If I just do a git push from here, because I know the git commands, it will actually push, recreate the branch again, and it will actually trigger the build again on this branch because of that, which it is doing. And once that is done, we will see the, yeah, it is done. So then it will trigger the branch here, it will trigger the build here, right? So pipeline. So it's fun. If you look at it, if you know all the steps, you can go and check whether things are happening or not happening. That gives you extreme visibility into the whole process. When you are using these vibe coding tools, all of this stuff is happening, but you don't know how it's happening. So as an engineer, you need to know how it is happening, and that's an important part of the process. So now it failed. Why did it fail? So must be some problem with the replacement. So what is it failing on? Deploying Cloudflare account, processing variable, env, this thing is env bucket name. Okay, so I'm using a bucket name. In this case, I don't need the bucket name because this was a template. This has extra stuff in there. So let me just replace these extra stuff that I don't need. So you can remove this stuff from your templates because you don't need them, and they are there because the template is there. And so if you need to use them, you can use them. If you have D1 databases, you can have them. But for now, I have removed everything. D1. Okay. So wrangler.toml file will only be there in Cloudflare projects. It's Cloudflare way of managing configuration. So make sure you don't have any secrets in wrangler.toml. All your environment variables for each environment can be there, but don't have any secrets in there, kind of thing. Okay, so we did this again. See, if you look at it, I have not written any code. Why? Because right now I'm not debugging problem with my code. I'm just trying to debug problem with my environment. If my code was also there, I would not know whether I messed it up. I have not written code because my deployment is not working. I'm not yet ready to write code. I want to make sure that my deployment is correct, so that when the deployment is when I start writing code, I don't waste time. So this initial setup will help me not waste time in the future. Most people write all the code and then deploy later, and then spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the problem is. So that's why I like to my first activity of software development lifecycle is always deploy code, figure out what the problems are. Okay, so what is it complaining about? The host name mytest.api is invalid. Please provide. Okay, so again, configuration issues because I did a universal replacement. So let me do this. This is going to, I don't need this route either right now. Let's remove this route. Let's remove this route. Let's remove this route. I need to correct this route anyway. Let's remove this route. Okay, okay, okay. One more time. I have not written any code till now because, okay, the template has the problem. Why should I waste my time on writing code when the template is not yet ready, basically? So let's see, actions. Okay, done. Actions. Okay, it's going on. Let's see. And if you look at it, do you see how many times I've pushed and deployed? I've done it 5 or 6 times in front of you, right? Think about it. How many times do you push and deploy code? Basically, maybe once in 1 hour. Like I like to finish error, get it deployed. The goal is that you need to get it working always. So the more you quickly you push, the less code you push, the smaller the problem you will debug, the faster the deployment you'll have. This is what will save you time once you start working, basically. Bigger changes take a really long time to do, basically. Okay, now it got deployed. So let's see if my worker is correct this time. So I had the my test API playtest, basically, that is there. One thing you will have to do, because I did not use Craft Studio, and one Craft Studio will do it automatically, but you need to do this for now, is that add a binding. Cancel, not binding. I'm sorry, I'm wrong. I need to go to domains. You can say add domains. This URL will, so there is a URL it creates. Yeah. I don't use this URL. What I would like to do is add domain, and I want to use humanizeIQ.ai, and I want to say https://www.playtest.humanizeIQ.ai, iq.ai, and humanizeIQ.ai slash, and what is the URL? What is the project name? My underscore test underscore API star. Okay, so HTTPS. Okay, and route domain. Actually, this is, sorry, wrong place. You need to go to route pattern, not to domain, and do this HTTPS playtest API my test API. This thing add route. Could not understand. There's a space here before this. Okay, add route. Okay, so if I do this, and maybe it will work, maybe it will not work. If I'm lucky, it will work in one go slash. Oh, sorry, it is still wrong. What is wrong? Can somebody tell me what did I do wrong?
After .ai slash, it should be API slash.
Correct. You're correct. So our convention is that it should always be slash API. That's what I did wrong. So let's look at it. That is what is correct. So let's try this slash docs. Magic. See, one go. So once it deployed, one go, no changes needed, right? So 15 minutes, 5 deployments, we got it working, we got it deployed, playtest URL, basically, right? That's how the front-end application also work by the way, right? Now this is default. This has the health endpoint like we have. We can test it using curl. We can test it using it required. So there's a problem here. The health endpoint is asking for an API key. So that's the first defect we should fix, basically, right? The health endpoint is asking for API key. So what will I do? I will go back to here, and I will need to configure my kilo code. I just showed you a little while back what to configure in kilo code. So you need to go to custom provider. You need to go to playtest. Playtest. You need to go to light LLM, and then you want to go to HTTP. Was it there? Oh, no, https://ai playtest.secehub.com, and then you need the API key. Do you remember how to get the API key? We go to auth AI Studio. I will get the API key from here. I'll go in here, put it in here, and then I don't need. Let me just add the models, submit. Okay, and then I will use the default model to be okay. Though I will go to models. Default model should be Chat GPT latest. Done. Save. Okay. The health endpoint is oh sorry, I need to do one more configuration. Agent behavior. I need to go in here. This is a new project, so I need to add a file. Instruction. Let's call it local underscore instructions dot md right. I rename and this thing, right? Local instructions dot md. The key thing is that I actually should not do this. Git checkout playtest, which branch is done, right? Git pull. Okay, I will create a new branch. Git checkout -b feature fix -health endpoint. Okay, and then local instructions. So I do need to get the instructions, which I will get from development profiles. No, not development profiles, from developer skills. Okay, I will take the local instructions. I will copy this. I will paste it here. Okay, and then I will make sure that my kilo settings are going to rules are /local underscore instructions dot md. Add local underscore instructions dot md. Let me just copy path, kilo settings. Yeah, it's correct. Dot slash this thing, and okay, it's correct. And then I also want to add the save this, and then skills folder is where is the skills folder? Skills is this skills. Okay, I'll take this and go to this one, skills URL, add save. Okay, health endpoint, it should not be authenticated. So let's see what it does. So it is getting my this thing rules. It is following my rules. If you look at it, it is getting those. Let me do this. It is getting those instructions.md, developer.md, just like I showed before, kind of thing. It is going to create the hopefully AI. It is going to. So example approval. So AI doc is not found. Therefore, code changes including cannot be performed. Required action, provide explicit approval. So I will say yes, approved. Approved. Get the file open. Okay, correct file. It knows how to open. Okay. So right now it is documenting because the project is not documented, right? Because it started from a template, so it is starting from there. So And this is kind of, these are the things which allow you to control your AI, right? Like if you look at it, if you started doing in your project, your AI would have started working basically. But in my case, it did not start working. It said there is no documentation, I cannot work, right? And so you control the AI versus AI doing whatever it wanted, kind of thing. And this is what guys all want to know, how to control AI so that AI behaves the way you want and you don't behave the way most of you will become people whom AI controls. So AI will be the boss and you will be working for AI. Some of you will learn to become the boss of AI, so you will control AI, right? And that determines how you work, will determine which bucket you fall under basically. Okay, so documentation prerequisite is action perform this thing, document contains this thing, this satisfy the original gonna yes. So what did it do? It okay, this is okay, proceed. So even though I gave the requirement before, did not ask it to document, it actually did the documentation. Now it is saying that it is ready to do the work that I'm asking it to do, and it is going to try to do the work. Again, I did it directly in the code mode. I'm comfortable. I would not suggest you start with the code mode. Start with the plan mode, review the code, understand it, and then shift to the code mode. It will ask you to shift basically. Plan mode, the advantage is that it can document, but it cannot change code basically. That's the advantage of the plan mode basically. So Kilo Code provides these modes. These are definitely very useful kind of thing. Debug mode is there, plan mode is there, ask mode is there. So very useful modes. So definitely. Anyway, so I think it has done the thing. So let's look at it. It says, it tells me what it did, and I can look at it, and it says that path includes this, skip for Swagger. Okay, so it is saying that, okay, it is adding this path to this thing, one of the path which is being skipped for authentication. I am good. Let's put a comment in there, and let's put a comment in there. Come on, come on, come on. Things are slow. Computers are slower than me. I don't like it. Okay, it's dead. Done. Okay, so I have deployed, I have sent it out, and now if I look at the magic again, let's look back at it. So let's look at not this one. So let's look at this one code. It should see my comment. So it is there. So pull request action is completed. So let's go to pipeline. See if the build is going on. Build is going on. It is working. So I wrote the code, I reviewed the code, I'm deploying it out there. The reason I can do auto PR is that I reviewed the code in VS Code itself before sending it. So I don't need to do a manual PR to review the code, right? So that's the benefit of doing code review. Okay. So I did this, and so it is deployed. So now if I go to my API, where is it? Okay. So this API, so let's execute the health endpoint again. API, try it out, execute, and this time it worked. Okay, so I fixed the code, I fixed the problem, right? Done. Did it take so think about it. If I told you that I had to do 28 tasks a day, task number 1, create the repo, build and deploy it, can be done in 15 minutes. Fix the bug to remove the health endpoint, can be done in 15 minutes, end to end, right? Including deployment, code review. How you break it down, you don't try to do all. If I try to do all of it together, half an hour to do it, so I increase my time. So try to do smaller chunks of work, right? What I did not show you, which I showed you before, is how to run this locally. You should be testing it locally also. This was a template, so I did not test it, but you can do npm I, and this should run locally also. So I'm going to show you that. And then if I say npm run, npm run dev, sorry, npm run dev. Would you like to? Yes. Okay, so it is done, it is running. So if I go to localhost colon 8787 slash API slash, what is it? My underscore test underscore API slash docs. Magic, it works locally also. I can run this health endpoint here also, and it will execute here also. So it works basically. And you can use Postman to test it locally also, right? So today's session, we learned about what is a REST API, how to develop a REST API, how to write code using the dev pod environment, how to test it using curl command, postman command, and swagger command. How to the part which is going to do next happen is that we are going to try to integrate our APIs with our front end code using openapi.json. You can try it out on your own, but we do have a class somewhere during the week to do that. I'm going to stop here because I really need to leave at this point of time for my next appointment. But I'll take 2 minutes to answer any questions on anything that you have. If you have any, if anybody has any questions. All of you, everybody should be creating an API project and creating, let's say, create an API which will take 2 numbers and generate the sum of those 2 numbers. So simple calculate function, which will take 2 numbers and generate this thing and put it as an API, deploy it in playtest environment, right? So this is an exercise in just the process and all of those things. And I want to see what you do. Very simple API. Do it. Should not take, like I said, I did it in half an hour. If you can get it done in half an hour, end to end with all the steps, then that's great. But if you're spending more than an hour, you need to practice so that you can get it down to half an hour or less. Okay. Thank you, guys. Hope you learned something from here. I'll see you again on the next class or next meeting. Thank you.